I certainly say, Madam Speaker, and I think Oregonians will agree with me.
Political bodies exist to secure responsible government and to execute the will of
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Today's another podcast of the Oregon discussion on government efficiency, or Oregon D.O.G.E, as we fondly call it. I'm here with some friends and back to the podcast once again, great member of the staff, Tanner Elliott. Thanks, Tanner, for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me once again. It's always great to be with you three, so it's always a good time.
Well, Tanner's done some research, and I'm glad we have on the transportation expert among Senate Republicans, the guy who's devoted a lot of that, Senator Bruce Starr. And
great to be here.
Thanks for being on. And of course, our leader, the leader in the Senate Republicans, Senator Daniel Bonham.
Oh, man.
Oh, esteemed leader, great leader. I was reading about the other great leader from North Korea and what happened when his ship, battleship or something, the destroyer, they launched it and it like capsized right in front of him.
You always make me feel so special.
Well, the word great leader is used for not just you. There's other great leaders out there.
Well, I think we should recognize that Tanner is more than just a staff, Senate staff, but we also have a great young leader.
Oh,
Young Republicans, that's right.
Exactly. He's the state chairman of the Young Republicans. So a up-and-coming great leader, for sure.
yeah.
And a voice of the future of the Republican Party.
And fresh off a Senate versus House championship.
Which we are the Senate is the champions.
We are
after
the
the
champions.
charity basketball tournament.
That's right, Tanner. Nice work out there. So Tanner works for Senator David Brock Smith and did some research for us on the topic of dirty laundry. So this episode, we're going to be airing Oregon's dirty laundry. And we're going to do that over a series of podcasts, what works and what doesn't work. And we're going to focus on what's not working and ask viewers to decide if this is the government that's working for them. And so dirty laundry, and we're going to look at some projects, but we're going to jump in and talk about perhaps what went wrong and some of Oregon's efforts. So Tanner, what do you got for us today?
So we're beginning with the CAMS project, and CAMS begins with capital accessibility, maintenance, and safety. So for those who don't know, the Capitol has been under construction since 2017. There have been 3 phases of construction. And since 2022, we have been in phase 3, which is the costliest and the most construction-intensive phase. The estimated cost of phase 3 was originally $375 million. The total amount now for phase 3 is $465 billion, and that's a $90 million increase in spending for the taxpayer. Phase 3 was supposed to be finished this last January, but it looks like it will not be completed until September of this year or even 2026. I couldn't find an exact deadline on the government website of when they said it would be done. And total amount for all 3 phases of capital construction will cost the taxpayer $595 million.
So, and this is the Capital Access, Maintenance, and Safety Project because
That's capital with an O.
Yeah.
Capitol,
Yeah.
the state capitol building, built during the 1930s after the second capitol from Oregon burnt down. And some of our detractors have called our Capitol building the Great Bowling Trophy because it sort of looks like that a little bit, but it's our Capitol, so we like it. But holy moly, we have spent a lot of money. And one of the issues that came up was that the Capitol was seismically unsound. And so initially the request was we got to make sure that the Capitol stays up during a subduction zone earthquake, which would be a 9.0 roughly off the coast of Oregon. We won't get into all the predictions about the subduction zone earthquake, but it won't be fun. And so one of the issues that came up originally was, what about our schools? Why are we, I mean, if the capital stays up, schools plummet. That's not good. So then they delayed it, sent some money out for some seismic improvements to schools, and then rolled through the appropriations to begin the capital reconstruction. Now, one of the things I've heard about when I asked was, what level of earthquake did all this money go to pay for survival and, safety? And I was told an 8.4, and I was also told an 8.6. And then I said, okay, so the capital's not going to stay up during a subduction zone earthquake, or, but at any event, we spent a lot of money on it, and it's had huge cost overruns and delays, and of course, it shut down the capital for a while.
Yeah. So isn't the goal is basically that they jacked up the capital, or they dug under the capital and then put the capital on either like a roller or pieces that will ultimately move back and forth, so that the capital actually will move during an earthquake instead of just fall down, right?
Well, I think that, yes, I think that's the goal.
That's the idea.
And how they did it, I don't know. I'm not an engineer, but I think
It's
you're right.
remarkable, actually, an engineering feat, and obviously very, 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 very expensive.
Yeah. I don't want it to fall over. I don't think anyone does, but we do have to, of course,
So
ask the question.
what kind of capital could we build with $600 million?
Yeah, yes.
New building.
Yeah, I think that capital cost originally was $35 million is what I heard. I don't know if that's accurate, but I'm sure the many listeners to this podcast will immediately go out and Google that and come up with that number. But it is enormous amount of expense. And once again, Oregon came, it's more expensive. So that's roughly a 20% increase in cost and time. And let's hope that it stays up in an earthquake. But they're doing some other remodeling, which we've heard about. I haven't seen it.
I do go back to the comment about the schools, though. My first interaction ever meeting Ted Ferrioli, and he said, "Kid, you're not doing this right." He said, "You keep arguing logic," and he said the only way we got them to not spend this money on the capital was to make the argument that you have to do it for the kids first. Like the only way we got them to recognize that our schools were at risk was to shame them into, don't you want to protect the kids? And sure enough, they went through and they made a bunch of seismic investments in schools across the state before they ever did this. But to your point, we asked the question.
We're not going to.
Exactly. We asked the question, right? As we're heading into phase 3, we said, hey, out of curiosity, what would it have taken to build a new capital on a new piece of land? And they said, a little bit less than what we're spending. About 500 million was the answer.
To build a brand new one.
Yeah, so we'll be at about 600 by the time we're done. At the time, they were projecting us to be at 550. And they said if we were to build a new one, it probably would have been about 500 million. And you could have built exactly what you wanted. You could have built it to a code. And not that there's no historic significance, not that there's not some piece of this building that appeals to Oregonians to want to preserve and protect. But no one was even given that option. We didn't even consider, should we build a new one?
Yes. So some would argue, it's dirty laundry, but it's construction that happens. But, this podcast is not about to explain away inefficiencies. We're to point it out and say, hey, this is one example where our state moved forward to refurb the older capital, and it's getting more and more expensive. But okay, what's next?
Our next one is the I-5 bridge replacement. So the bridge is 2 years behind schedule. The 2020 estimated cost was 3.2 to 4.8 billion. In 2022, the new estimated cost was 5 to 7.5 billion. And in January of 2024, officials acknowledged the project's 2022 estimation was inaccurate. So the officials were supposed to come out with a new estimation in the summer of last year, but delayed it until June of 2025. So we should be finding out what the new estimated cost is any day now. And the project's own environmental impact statement says adding mass transit and light rail would increase carbon emissions, and doing nothing would result in the 49% reduction in emissions.
Well,
What are you looking at me for?
Bruce Starr, you know, I voted in 2013 to replace the bridge because I saw how bad the bridge was and how vulnerable Oregon is to have a choke point between San Diego and, in essence, Vancouver, BC, and back then we didn't even. But in 2013, I think it was $2 billion, right?
So it was the estimate way back then was $3 billion, and the funding was $1 billion from the feds, $1 billion raised from tolling, and $1 billion from Washington and Oregon. Oregon came up with its $500 million, and Washington State, at the time, the Washington State Senate controlled by Republicans, and the senator that represent Clark County told the rest of his Republican senators that he didn't want the bridge built. And so the rest of the Republican senators said, great, we'll take that money, go spend it project somewhere else. So that project would have been completed. If we had moved forward at that moment in time, that project would be opening probably next year or the year after. And it would be about $3 billion, give or take, obviously with inflation. But now we're talking about basically the same bridge, a decade plus later, and it's easily twice the cost. So that's a lesson to learn about. The longer that the clock ticks on big projects like this, the more expensive they become. There's no question about that.
So I-5 replacement bridge, I mean, it's interesting in what we've seen as money go out just on planning that has now been changed. And so, again, this is, a factor that a lot of Oregonians don't realize that, we do have a partner called the state of Washington.
Correct.
And the feds, because it's their interstate freeway system. And just how much. Now, how much it costs, how much, inaction. But Washington now is on board.
Yeah, both states have basically both states have committed, I believe it's about $1 billion now from the new updated plan. Both states have committed those dollars. There's a plan to do the tolling piece, and the feds are coming in to help. It's, if you look back, like the Glenn Jackson Bridge, which is the bridge that's crosses the river in 205. That bridge was built 40 years ago. Back in the day when the federal government basically funded 90% of construction of the interstate system. So I think that bridge was about 347 million or something like that. Back then, the feds chipped in 90% of those dollars. Well, that doesn't happen anymore. So these projects now, it's that one, they're way more expensive for a variety of reasons. But it falls heavily on the states to figure out how to fund these projects today.
Well, and we've talked about that on this podcast before about this situation with the feds. We're going to tip over 37 trillion of debt here soon. We're at 36.9, et cetera. And how the only logical trajectory is the contraction. So the feds are paying less on projects, and the states in of course services, And so is Oregon prepared? And our conclusion is Oregon is not prepared for what lies ahead, the storm that's begun.
Right.
And this is just one example because Oregonians, by and large, want a new bridge. We're going to have a new bridge. And I mean, the bridge is 100 and some years old, right?
Yeah.
And it operates with the lift.
Correct. It's the only stop sign on I-5 between Mexico and the Canadian border. So
On the freeway system.
on the freeway system.
If that bridge goes
On
up.
I-5. Yeah.
I
it
just
stops
hope it
traffic.
goes up and doesn't stay up.
Well, yeah, there was a few years ago when they had to repair and replace the runions, basically the devices that raise and lower the weights.
Yeah.
And that bridge was shut down for a period of time in order to accomplish that. That was the system. That was when basically the departments of Washington and Oregon created a serious incentive for the contractor to come up with a way to do it in a shorter period of time. And they got this, if they were to do it shorter every day that they got it done with earlier than the contract, they got a huge bonus. And they figured out how to do it in like record time. And they had this massive bonus, but instead of having the bridge shut down for 3 weeks, it was shut down for like 6 days. But at the end of the day, it is a problem. We did talk about the subduction zone earthquake that'll occur, and all the predictions say that bridge will fail in that earthquake. Not only will you interrupt interstate commerce, but you'll also interrupt the commerce on the river. So that's a problem obviously on both sides. So at the end of
it's hard to navigate a barge full of grain when a bridge is.
Yeah, and your weights are in the bottom of the river. It's a problem. So, we talk about dirty laundry. Yeah, this is an issue that if we had done it, a decade ago, it would have been less. It demonstrates I don't want to say the power, but kind of the power of one particular legislator. And here we are talking about it. Basically the same bridge, slightly different than the one that we were talking about a decade ago, but basically the same thing, and it's twice as expensive. So that's a lesson.
Do we have a design?
So-
are we set at this point?
No, not 100%. I asked that question the other day, but in general terms, I think they're pretty well identified what it's going to look like. But specifically, I think the answer is no, because I asked that
Because we've talked
exact
about
question.
like the double deck fixed span. We've talked about a single deck fixed, and we like single level movable span. Like I know we've had different options, and I remember previously with Senator Boak with Senator Finley talking about like, do we actually know what we're trying to fund? And I remember there being a significant difference too in the cost,
Some of them,
depending
yeah.
on which one you would choose.
Yep, I think that's right. So apparently they're going to nail that down pretty soon.
But it
So
would be curious
we
to
can
see
trust them.
like what Oregonians, what Washingtonians, Southwest, like what are they concerned about? Bike and ped? Are they concerned about how many lanes? Are they concerned about having transit be able to get back and forth?
Well, I
Like,
think transit was the issue with Senator Blocker, wasn't it?
No, it was Benton,
Benton,
Don Benton.
Don Benton at the time.
well, light rail specifically, though,
Yeah,
right? Not
they
just transit, but they want
Yeah,
light
they
mean,
didn't
it's-
want light rail on it.
Yeah, in a perfect world, would we fund a light rail on that bridge, or would you do rapid transit, bus, rubber tire transit, which makes a whole heck of a lot more sense. But just like I think we're going to talk about the Rose Quarter here in a minute, you cannot build a project in an area without having the approval from all the local governments in that area. So obviously in I-5 bridge, you've got on the Oregon side, you've got Multnomah County, the city of Portland, you've got Metro, and you got TriMet. You have to have all of them to agree what you're going to build before you can go forward. And those folks are absolutely 100% committed to light rail. And then you go on the other side of the river, and I think the folks in Vancouver, the city, are probably have a different political philosophy than the general voters in Clark County. But at the end of the day, they all have to get together to say okay on what you're going to build. And that's why you end up having light rail on that bridge, because particularly on the Oregon side, you're not going to get approval from those local governments without it. So,
All right, what's next, Tanner?
I do. Before we move on to that, though, we've talked about earthquakes now twice.
Mm-hmm.
I just am reminded that that's a logarithmic scale, and so you talked about like 8.4 to 8.6, but then you go to a 9.0. That's like 32 times greater. And so,
Is it really that?
yeah, when you go from a 8 to a 9, like that's
Wow.
the
it's a
scale.
magnitude of multiple times.
Yeah. So when you said earlier, like the subductions, like that's a 9.0 or greater. Like that is.
Well, because you had the subduction zone earthquake in Japan.
Right.
It was a 9.0. And you had a subduction zone earthquake up in Alaska in 1964. And
which is what we've talked about, the big one,
The big
Cascadia.
one.
Oh my
The
gosh, this
Cascadia
9.0 is coming.
right.
So let's make sure our building can withstand an 8.4.
well, maybe it's only. Well, I don't know. I'm not a geologist, but if you have a 9.0 on the coast, what is the consequence in Salem? I mean, obviously it's a massive earthquake, but I don't know. I know probably watching this episode are at least a dozen geologists.
I'm sure they'll weigh in.
I'm hoping in the comment section they'll let us know, but it's massive. I've gone through the resiliency plan that Oregon has, and it's just shocking.
Parts of your district become very, very important
Yeah.
for the future of the state of Oregon.
I did have a Democrat when we were being briefed on it. I think it was 2011 when that first came out, and Democrat from Portland, great guy, Jules Bailey.
Yeah.
You remember Jules?
Yep.
Very, very smart guy. Enjoyed being with him on the committee and friend. And so we're being briefed on just, and everyone's kind of going, oh my God. And then he leans over to me and says, this is how you become governor.
Well,
because
the Redmond Airport becomes extraordinarily important.
yeah, I mean, basically Central Oregon becomes hub. And I think the plan, they are looking at Core 3 funding, but making, in essence, Redmond the center for state government. And it becomes the FEMA center because of the airport and,
you're able to move freight in and out. And
Well, and, I live in Powell Butte, which is, as the crow flies, about 6 miles or less, or maybe 7 miles to the Redmond airport. So, yeah, that's my big plan to become governor.
there you go, man.
I mean, I would hope I could become governor a different way, maybe the conventional way and et cetera. But Jules Bailey's thought is, you don't really have a chance at that. Yeah. But obviously we're jesting, we're laughing, we're kidding. The subduction zone earthquake is
serious.
No,
it's just unimaginable destruction and just suffering that's going on.
But in the context of dirty laundry, if you're concerned about a 9.0 earthquake, why would you build something that would resist an 8.4 earthquake?
Well, and maybe I didn't get accurate information. I'm hoping the leaders of the CAMS project will let us know what the rebuild, what that capital. But wouldn't it be a bit ironic to have spent all that money and have the capital not survive the big one? But I sure hope it's not during a session when it hits.
Amen.
Loss of life would be awful. But it's going to be, the coast, it's really, and then Portland, during the earthquake resiliency talks about, the liquefaction effect. It's just really, really awful. So Oregon has been, since 2011, making investments, in my opinion, not fast enough in resiliency, how, communication system, fuel supplies, et cetera. And of course, one of the reasons the capital for the construction was that this is seismically unsound. So anyway, on to the next. So this is a Rose Quarter project. So Bruce, what the heck is going on there? Explain this to folks.
So the Rose Quarter project is obviously, well, maybe it's not obvious to everybody, but it's in the Rose Quarter area of Portland where the Moda Center now is. It used to be called the Rose Quarter, or Rose Garden. So this is a freeway widening project. Currently, if you drive through there, it's the only area in a major metropolitan and I-5 where the I-5 goes down to 2 through lanes. It is a major point of congestion. It is the intersection of major freeways. You got I-84 coming in there, obviously an I-5. There's a lot of on and off movements, so on-ramps and off-ramps. And that, again, adds to congestion. It is a very important project if you try to move freight in our state. Again, it's the intersection of 2 major interstates. Interstates, obviously, are where the truckers are moving freight. And so when the legislature in 2017 were negotiating a highway funding bill, transportation funding bill, the Oregon Trucking Association said, if we're going to support increasing our weight mile taxes and the taxes that we pay to fund roads and bridge improvements in our state, we need to ensure that the Rose Quarter project gets funded. This project has been in the works for decades. It's not all of a sudden people didn't wake up and say, oh my gosh, we got this problem in Portland, the major congestion. This has been something that's been talked about for a long, long time. So the bill that was passed in the legislature identified the project as one of the major projects that needed to get funded. But instead of funding it completely, they gave the project $30 million a year to help to fund this project. Unfortunately, the problem is that the project wasn't fully scoped. What I mean by that was that, like we just talked about the I-5 bridge, the local governments, City of Portland, Multnomah County, Metro, weren't on board with exactly what the project was going to look like. So that's really the crux of the challenge, is getting those folks on board, and just recognize that the voters in the City of Portland, and they elect leaders, obviously, to represent them in the City of Portland, Multnomah County. They might have different ideas about investing in widening freeways and making it easier to have cars and trucks drive in a less congested manner. And quite honestly, those folks have a large voice in the Portland metropolitan area. So this project has turned into something way more than just widening a freeway and adding, better on-ramps and off-ramps to make the movements easier. It's way different than that today. And that's really the reason why the project has gone from several $100 million to almost $2 billion.
Oh, my word.
But this was a major negotiated
Right.
point of contention in 2017.
Yeah. I was there.
Have to have this. And when did the conversation shift to putting a lid? Was that around 2019 that they started talking about, hey, to belay your environmental concerns, what we're going to do with this freeway, we're going to put a lid on it, and then we're going to develop that land. Like, where did that, and where does that factor into the conversation over the price?
Yeah, I mean, that is the question. And that's part of getting the community on board. The local elected leaders were listening to their constituents who were up in arms, at least some of them, about, oh my gosh, you can't widen this freeway, you can't expand the capacity.
Why not widen the freeway? Because that would be more cars, and they just don't want more cars.
There are individuals in our state that do not believe we ought to pave another foot of Oregon land to provide more capacity for cars and trucks to move freight and people.
But I remember seeing back in the day when I was in the House and we were negotiating this, the carbon emission, in essence, the emission problems when you get that much traffic congested in a small amount of space, it is bad.
When congestion creates carbon emissions, obviously tailpipe emissions when you're sitting in traffic is worse than if you're driving at speed. That is not a point of contention. That is a fact. So, but you've got folks, again, in Portland area that, don't want to build roads. They want to get folks onto light rail. They want you to ride your bike. They want you to walk. They want you to do a whole host of things other than getting a vehicle that runs on gasoline or diesel to go someplace. And if you look at the new, the footprint of this project today, not only does it have a lid or a cover, but it's got, a pedestrian and bicycle only bridge. So that supports the mindset in Portland where cars are bad, alternatives to vehicles are the direction that they want to go. Major multimodal local street improvements. And when you say multimodal, again, you're talking transit, you're talking pedestrians and bicycle paths and things like that. So that's how this project has gone from, $450-ish million to almost $2 billion. So,
And for ODOT critics, right? People are just saying, well, this is normal. And no one gets fired. No one gets reprimanded. No one gets demoted. You don't scope these projects well. You make a commitment to how much they're going to cost. You negotiate in good faith. In House Bill 2017, you make a promise to the trucking community. We know this is a bottleneck for you. We're going to deliver this. It doesn't happen. It becomes a different scope. It becomes a greater price.
Yeah, and this is a story, unfortunately, of transportation projects writ large. When for instance, the I-217 project in Washington County, widening that project, consolidating on and off ramps, the original plan and what's ultimately built is different. Why is that? Because the city of Beaverton says, hey, if you're going to be here and you're going to be tearing up all this stuff, why don't we do this, that, and the other thing, and it basically adds to the scope. It's kind of like while you're here, or since you're here,
since you're here,
you might as well do this too.
I'm sure we all heard, since you're up, get me this.
Yep.
I remember being I was my dad's remote control for the television. Hey, why you up? Turn that to channel.
See, you're dating yourself. This is how I date myself. I remember when I lived in Tigard, I could get from 217 from one end to the other in less than 15 minutes. And people are like, oh, I know how old you are.
Yeah.
You said you had to get up and be the remote control.
Yeah. Back in the day.
Yeah. And so, in hindsight, looking at I wasn't in the building in 2017, but in hindsight, this project probably shouldn't have been included because they didn't have agreement on the scope of the project from those local, from the local governments, from the city of Portland, from Multnomah County, from Metro. There wasn't agreement on the scope, and the legislature, ODOT, whoever was in that room negotiating, the trucking association should have known that it wasn't scoped. They should have demanded that we get a project that we understand the ultimate cost of before we make a promise to build something. It's hard.
Is there current litigation on the widening of the Rose Quarter?
I don't think so.
Okay.
But do you think there is?
There was at the end of 2024, and I can't remember if it's been resolved.
I don't think that. My understanding, there's not. I could be wrong, but I don't believe there is.
But
they have enough funding to move forward, start construction this construction season. So they're going to start doing phase 1 on this project.
Well, it's an example again of Oregon. If I draw the analogy, it's the CAMS project. Cost overruns. Then we got the bridge project, didn't do it. And then now we've got stumbling in. So. The dirty laundry on a lot of these construction projects is poor planning.
Poor planning.
That seems to be the
poor scoping.
theme. Scoping, et cetera. Well,
we're not talking. I don't know. Do you have Abernathy?
We don't. Yeah.
But Abernathy is one where, and that really is an issue with scoping, where they didn't do the engineering work that they needed to do before they started to figure out, oh my gosh, we got to go way deeper on these pilings in order to get to bedrock because we didn't do the geological work that needed to be done on the front end of this thing, so we understood what we were faced with.
And 248 million becomes 815.
Yeah. whole heck of a lot more.
But when you tell taxpayers that,
It's hard to, yeah, their mind explodes.
how is that even possible?
Well,
Mike, I'm going to build you a house. I'll cost you $250,000. Hey, I'm so sorry. I needed to let you know that it's cost $815,000 to build that same house. There's nobody that would be okay with that, right? There's nobody that would say, okay, well, I guess I'll just come up with the money. But when government does it, we just say, oh, yeah, we got to have the bridge. It's a complete disconnect for people because it's not coming out of their, like, they're not writing the check directly.
Right.
And they don't associate the taxes that they pay with that cost overrun. And again, it's not that we're not going to build the bridge. We're not going to build the next 3 projects because we have to finish the bridge. Like, we're going to complete that bridge, but we're not going to move to the Rose Quarter. We're not going to move to I-205 widening. We're not going to get to the I-5. We can't do the next one until we finish this one. And so your tax dollars that were meant for that next project now have to go to this one before we can move on.
and of course, a lot of this is funded, right, by fuel tax
Yep.
and registration fees.
Yeah, fuel tax, gas tax dollars, registration fee dollars, title fee dollars.
And so when ODOT says, hey, we don't have enough money to plow the roads, then suddenly, again, poor planning, management. And yet you ask the question, who's been fired, right? If you're in charge of the executive branch in Oregon, right? Heads would roll, right?
Oh, yeah.
So to speak. And
Well, the governor negotiated a pay increase across the enterprise of state government. So state employees across the entire enterprise got a pay raise. That pay raise to ODOT cost them $92 million. So $92 million, and we can argue whether the employees deserve a raise or not, but the reality is that's $92 million that's not going to build a project. Instead, it's going to, to pay raises.
and just continues.
Just
'Cause
continues. Exactly.
Your next cost of living is
The current service level of the Department of Transportation just went up by $92 million a year.
So in the 23-25 biennium, above and beyond cost of living increases, which we build into the budget, there was an extra $500 million that the governor put into that budget for collective bargaining agreements.
increases.
Yeah, to make sure that she had enough money there to negotiate with the labor unions, increases above and beyond cost of living.
So Tina Kotek, the governor, whose main donors in her election were public employee unions, sits across the table from public employee unions and negotiates the increase in their pay. How did she do? Is she a tough negotiator?
I doubt she declared a conflict of interest.
That might be the dirty laundry that we're talking about.
But it's tough because we were talking about it in caucus today, and what happens in caucus stays in caucus, except for when we talk about it outside of caucus.
Yeah.
If you look at the Democrat playbook so far this session, long session, it has been political favors. So far, the big bills, the controversial
Senate
bills.
Bill 916, and
the one we passed today, or they passed today.
Yeah, and there's others, but I guess, to a certain extent, on what we're trying to at least say to our viewers and let Oregonians know is that there has been significant mismanagement, controlling costs, all these things, whether in planning, and this is the quote dirty laundry. Now we're going to get to juicy dirty laundry, gossip dirty laundry, other type of stuff. But this is a kind of a nerdy podcast, so we're starting with, hey, if you're okay with these sort of project overruns, delay, lack of planning, et cetera, well then vote for status quo,
Right?
Because this has been ongoing for a long time, and Oregonians, by and large, don't think about it or know about it. They're paying gas taxes. But when ODOT says we don't have enough money, well, what's the first thing that same political party does?
Raise taxes.
We need a big gas tax increase.
Yeah, and we just heard the initial report from the consultants that did a high-level management review, and one of the issues that they raised is identifying the risks in these transportation projects, and the department not doing a good job doing that with recommendations how to do it better. And again, we've got to, as legislators, drive that home in this Department of Transportation. We cannot allow them to continue to operate the way they've been operating. And I'm fairly certain that we will make some significant reforms to this agency in the next 2 years.
I hope
I
so.
think we have to.
We have to, right?
Yeah, we have to. And then there's other state agencies we should tackle too, by the way.
We were, and at least we're airing out some and kind of laying the case again when there is very little accountability in government. Then you have projects that just either through poor planning, et cetera, and now the Oregonians who are paying fuel tax are told you got to come up with more. And of course, then ODOT says, well, we can't plow road. We need some more money to plow road. Well, so gamemanship. But Tanner, what's next?
Just another slide for the Rose Quarter project, but I just wanted to add the fact that we have the spending of this, or how much this project's going to cost, is a 335% increase in 8 years, spending-wise. So next is Travel Oregon. This story just came out a couple weeks ago. So first, the current budget of this agency is $45 million. Todd Davidson, who has led the agency since 1996, just retired this last week after complaints of outsized compensation and allegations of a toxic workplace. In 2024, Davidson's take-home pay was around $472,000, which is higher than any other state agency director. In 2024, Travel Oregon paid $13,581 for Davidson to fly first class to speak at a U.S.-China tourism summit in China.
Okay, so Travel Oregon, interesting thing. So now we're getting down into, again, accountability issues, right? And first of all, Travel Oregon they're promoting Oregon, correct? I'm not as familiar. Maybe you guys with your iPads and laptops open can tell me, what's the mission of Travel Oregon? What are they supposed to be doing?
Oh, that's a good question.
And then how in the heck are we paying this guy? Now, it's funded by the transit lodge taxes, right? So Oregonians...
Quasi
private public partnership?
Yeah, it seems like.
It's quasi-government. Yeah,
Quasi-government.
because
Okay.
it's funded by a tax, but we don't have direct oversight.
They have an Oregon Travel Commission or Tourism Commission.
All right. But we're paying, so he was paid a lot of money. And there was an article about it. I think most people were quite shocked how well Todd Davidson was paid. And I want the viewers to know he made more than members of the state Senate.
More than members of the state Senate earn in 10 years.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, at least.
it's a lot more.
So it's funded-
We make
it's
$3
funded-
grand a month, I think.
It's funded by a 1.5% statewide transient lodging tax. It's governed by the Oregon Tourism Commission.
Okay, so again, some dirty laundry.
So the Oregon Tourism Commission, doing business as Travel Oregon, works to enhance visitors' experiences by providing information, resources, and trip planning tools that inspire travel and consistently convey the exceptional quality of Oregon.
Well, some guy who's got that mission and has to go to China for a tourism summit, he's got to be able to, that's a long trip. So, no, wait, perhaps there's business class, there's other classes. When I flew on a long trip for the Air Force, I went to Bangladesh. I was not in first class or business class. I was.
Jump seat.
I was in the what's the lowest class you
Coach?
can be in? Coach. I was in coach, and you know what? I survived.
Yeah.
I survived, and yeah. But I do remember thinking, boy, it would be nice to have those, where you can sleep, one of those little sleeper things. At any event, that's a lot of money for a trip, but that's just an example. I mean, the dirty laundry concept is, hey, even when you're not looking at projects, we're looking at, in essence, a task that this agency or this quasi-government agency has, and people pay taxes for it. And again, the theme is you're paying taxes for a project, you're paying taxes for a service, and what did we get? A highly compensated guy, and people are scratching their head and thinking, are we getting value for that 1.5%? Now, some argue, well, a lot of out-of-state people pay that transit lodging tax. I don't know what the percentage is. I, on occasion, do stay in a hotel in Oregon. In fact, at the Ways and Means meeting, I stayed in a hotel, I think down the hall from you. Weren't you there?
Mm-hmm.
And La Grande. And I think, did we pay tax? We were state employees at the time. I don't know if we were exempt or
You
not.
did. It was 10%.
Oh, okay.
I'm sure. That's what that usually is.
All right. Well,
Transit lodging tax, TLT.
so any comments on
that local government relies on that money to attract more folks to La Grande. How they doing?
I will
La
say
Grande
that-
was great.
Good.
The hardest part about marketing, period, right? And I don't remember who said it. Ray Kroc stuck in my head, but I don't think it was him. But some famous Nordstrom's, McDonald's, whoever it was, said, I spent $2 billion on marketing and half of it worked. I just wish I knew which half.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so to come back and try and justify or to explain where this Travel Oregon group has had success, I would imagine is near impossible. But that's a hard pill to swallow, right? Like if you are somebody in the industry that's doing your own promotion, come to the beach, come to my hotel, come to my resort, come golf. Did Bandon Dunes benefit from Travel Oregon? Or is it
Probably.
just the fact that they are a global brand at this point, 5 top 100 public courses? Like, to your answer, you're right? Probably. Can they quantify it? Can they say that was worth the 1.5% we paid that then resulted in this guy making $500,000 a year? I don't know.
So their total budget, proposed budget for 25-27 is $92,314,200. That's the income, or that's the money coming in. They propose the equal amount going out. So imagine that. They're going to spend it all. Brand stewardship, destination stewardship. Their admin and operations is 14 million of that total 92 million. So,
Well, we want Oregonians to ask the question, am I getting value for the taxes that are paid?
right.
And, I think there have been growing concerns with how this
Well,
has
you
been
look,
operating.
again, and you look at Portland and their inability now to attract conventions and in a convention business. Within the last decade, they built a convention hotel next to the convention center. And yet that convention center has virtually no conventions coming. Why? Because the word on the street is Portland's not safe. And it's not the word on the street in Portland, it's the word on the street around the world. So, how is Travel Oregon helping to, fix that problem? Those are challenges that.
I mean, you would think that they would then come to the legislature like different advocacy groups do and say, you know what, you should repeal House Bill 3115 that allowed camping in public spaces. Like that was probably an overreaction to the Ninth Circuit ruling, and maybe we should allow local jurisdictions to control public spaces and make things attractive and promote public safety, and let's go a different direction. Food Bank does it. They come in and they advocate on behalf of global climate change. They come in and advocate on behalf of ag overtime workers. Like, where is Travel Oregon coming to say, you know what would help us market Oregon would be good policies from the state? And I'd be curious why they don't.
And in a short digression, it always makes me scratch my head / befuddled at times when the Oregon Food Bank, whose mission is distribution of food resources and et cetera, right? Mm-hmm. And comes in and takes a position, on issues that aren't related to that just happen to align with the social justice coalition.
Yeah, they supported House Bill 2002, which was the underage access to abortion and transgender surgery without parental consent, because that's something that Food Bank should care about.
Yeah. We're going to have, note to file, Tanner, we need to have a dirty laundry episode about nonprofits and the nonprofit industrial complex that gets money through state appropriations, and then look at how they advocate, and because it adds up. It's real money, but that's a digression. Anyway, anything else?
The last point I'd add that in 2020, the Secretary of State's office released an audit that focused on his outsized salary and that of his key staff. Over the previous 10 years, Davidson's salary has jumped 129% from 2012 to 2019. His managers received a 76% boost. In other state agencies, similar managers saw a 16% increase over those years. In 2017 alone, Travel Oregon's commissioners rewarded Davidson with a 29% raise.
Well, interesting fact. All right.
Yeah.
What's next?
Next is the Oregon Department of Forestry held a training at an all-inclusive resort outside of Bend. They reserved 5 4-bedroom cabins featuring hot tubs at a nightly rate of $428 per cabin. Total cost was $8,521 to host this training, and this was after taxpayers gave the Oregon Department of Forestry a $218 million bailout.
Now, I will say, the timing of this was terrible. Poor director Cal Makamoto, hosting this. But if you put 4 people in a 4-bedroom cabin at $428 a night, it's $109 per person. If you put them in a hotel, how much are you paying? Like, it was a bad look at the time. It was Brasada, right? Like, it was a.
Was it Brasada?
Yeah, I think
that's
so.
my district.
Right?
So.
Beautiful, though.
Yeah.
And a high-end luxury resort. Not the best look. But if you can get a 4-bedroom cabin for $428 and put 4 people in it, dollar cost average it, it's not that bad. The timing was terrible. The location caught the eye of people. This example, I defend a little bit. I will.
What we have, an example, though, of in Dirty Lines, we're going to get more, is that, again, is this the government you want? Now, as you said, perhaps we're unfairly picking on ODF. There's other examples we're going to go over to, but, taxpayers are getting tired of the lack of stewardship of their money.
Well, I think, too, taxpayers want to go to Brasada. They'd love to be able to afford Brasada. And so when they see state agencies going to Brasada and they're looking in their own wallet saying, no, I can't afford to go there, that's tough.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that. And again, I think that's part of the reason why ultimately we saw that director position turn over, because we had just given them a lot of money. This came out on top of a few other things with mismanagement. And in this case, a director, lost their job for certain failures. And I think this was kind of a final straw.
Yeah. Is that it, Tanner?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. Well, one of
But
the
you had
things.
one more, didn't you?
Oh, one more. Yeah,
One
more
more
slide. I
slide.
thought you
We have
meant
one
the
more
end of
slide.
this.
Okay.
This one. Sorry. And the last one is publicly funded taco party. So the governor hosted a $9,330 taco tostada party at the governor's mansion to recognize fellow government employees. State law allows only light refreshments for government staff parties paid by taxpayers.
Well, interesting. Any comments on that there,
And again,
Leader Bonham?
I think, if I remember correctly, I think the governor commented that this was like 120 people. Even still, if you dollar cost average that, you're over $80 a person to host a taco party. That is an insane amount of money.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. I mean, and again, I mean, I think we've all
Depends how
been,
much alcohol they had.
thank you. We've all been part of corporate activity or business activity where you go out to a nice dinner, and if you throw bottles of wine or alcoholic drinks on top of a bill, the bill can escalate quickly.
Yeah.
So $80 for a taco party, I can't imagine spending $80 per person for carne asada tacos.
Is that your taco of choice?
I'm more of a carnitas guy, but I'm just saying, like, there had to have been something else that we're paying for here other than just food.
So 120 people, really. That's a lot of people at Mahonia Hall.
I think that, again, though, like, we're going with recent stuff. Tanner didn't reach into the vault, but if you do, you quickly come to cover Oregon. Right. You don't have to go back too far to think about hundreds of millions of dollars that we spent.
We have got to cover that.
Obamacare.
It's just too good not to cover it.
Right?
Yeah.
And you can start to layer upon layer how many different IT projects that we've said, we can do this. We can handle this.
Yeah.
What's the work source? What's the payroll system that's Workday?
Workday.
Failing to pay, 50,000 state workers on time, having all sorts of like, we have failure after failure after failure when you get into dirty laundry on the IT side of things.
Well, and I think, part of what I think is worth noting is that if you are going to ask Oregonians to get through a tough decade that's begun, where we're going to have to, get by perhaps on less services. There's, they're asking Oregonians for tax increases on their fuel. I mean, their registration. You start going down the list. These types of situations that we've talked about today create cynicism. And it creates an attitude of, I don't want to give you any more because I can't trust that you've managed what you have correctly. And there becomes this fatigue factor. And part of the responsibility of leadership in government or public service is that you maintain that trust. And you maintain the trust with the people. And I think one of the things that we're seeing, and I highlighted today, are just in and of themselves stories that just eat away at that trust. To where Oregon, residents, we say taxpayers, even if you're in a situation in life, you're not paying all that tax or none at all because of your situation, there becomes this fatigue effect of just another story of an inefficiency. Is why can't this state build things? Why can't this state manage well? Why are, ODF folks at Brasada Ranch? First of all, I want to compliment them on their choice of Israel. That's Powell Butte.
That's a beautiful, yeah.
Oregon's best, I might add.
I'd love to be there.
And then a publicly funded taco party. Now, I got to be honest, there's a part of me that says, hey, for the governor to reward people or whatever, have, okay. It's the per head count where you're just like, All right. That seemed excessive.
Yeah, $1,500 party, no problem.
Right.
I think most people would say that makes sense. 120 people, $10 a head. I could run to a really nice taco stand down the road here
Right.
and get enough tacos for people, and we would have more than enough. But to your point, you layer upon that, then KGW, I think a year ago, said that the Secretary of State had an audit that showed $2.9 billion in accounting errors. And they, of course, premised that those were unintentional accounting errors.
Unintentional.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, thank God, because it was either that or they were fraudulent, right? so you're either incompetent or you're a fraud. Who was it? I think OPB, again this year, May 13th, 2025, another $1.8 billion in accounting errors that they're reporting. We had the ODOT accounting error. They overestimated how much we were going to draw down from the federal government. So again, when you're having conversations, for us, like, we rely on good information from our agencies, from our internal staff. And when we're told this is a $6.3 billion budget that we're trying to modify and grow to accommodate, the core mission things that we need to do. And then you find out, well, wait, actually this last year it was a $5.3 billion entity. We were $1 billion off. We overestimated how much we were drawing down. And so then you have to say, okay, well then, what did you cut? What did you not spend? Because you didn't have it. So are you further in the hole than we believed you to be? Or were you actually a smaller agency than you ever thought you were? It's hard to then govern and manage when you've got
Bad information.
trash information.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Senator Starr, $1 billion off on at ODOT was help just make sure our listeners understand. So that was, as
They
Leader
just-
Bonham said, it was just a bad estimate.
So they misjudged how much federal funds that they were going to receive in the biennium by $1 billion.
So did they therefore not need to provide certain services or things?
Well, so the reality is they made the adjustment in projects that they had thought that they could fund with that extra $1 billion that they didn't have, ended up being shoved down the calendar because they didn't have $1 billion that they thought they had. So projects moved that they expected to fund at this biennium got pushed into future bienniums. So it wasn't like $1 billion got put in somebody's back pocket. There was no.
And it's a timing issue in this case, right?
Oh, for sure.
The $1 billion is coming. It's just not coming within the time frame that they thought it was. But again, when we're being asked as legislators to come up with a bridge this gap for us, we're short $352 million to do the operations and maintenance that we need to do in this budget. But the budget numbers are wrong. Anyway, I made my point.
Yeah, I mean that at some point the legislature 2 years ago were in a similar situation we're in, approving a ODOT budget, and ODOT sat in front of them in that Ways and Means Committee that I'm sitting in today. I wasn't there then. And they told those legislators, yeah, we expect to get this amount of money in federal funds in the next 2 years. And what they told those legislators at the time was $1 billion wrong.
So it eats away at trust, and I think that's sort of the theme of, Dirty Laundry episode, is to say, in isolation, there can be a discussion of each instance, but it continues, the dirty laundry, so to speak. You look, the voters put one party in charge, and they have for quite a while, a couple of decades at least, in the legislative, and then quite a long time for the executive branch. But trust is being squandered, and we're in a time where the government is going to be asking, whether it's at the federal level or state level, and I think this is true for counties or cities, we need to make cuts, or we need to ask you to contribute more. If you don't have a trust relationship with those you've been chosen to serve, don't be surprised when those voters, those constituents, say no, or they don't believe you when you say, look, we did our best to assess here, we're going to have to cut in there. You know, this is a problem. It's a problem that is acute in Oregon. It's not a problem that is exclusive to Oregon, but it is a problem here, and we wanted to discuss it and let the viewers know we're going to be bringing out examples of more of dirty laundry. But then we're also going to be talking about, in the midst of this, you know, you got to wonder why some of the ideas flowing out of Salem seem so radically stupid at a time where we need, frankly, wisdom.
Right.
But that's on another day. Leader Bonham, you deserve the last word because you are the leader.
Well, I'll
the
just say
great
this.
leader.
The great leader.
The great leader.
Yesterday, we found out we're about to spend $11.4 billion on education. Like, I am looking forward to getting some feedback from constituents on what they think about that record level of funding. And I think we're at the point of funding where nobody's going to be able to say we underfunded schools.
Oh, they'll say it.
So the performance.
I'm sure the OEA will say it.
But if you remember Governor Kotek, when she asked for this recommended amount, and we're essentially, I think she asked for 11.36 and we're giving her 11.4. So we're giving her what she asked. And she said, we won't give the money without accountability. I'm expecting this to be like the 36,000 homes we're going to build a year. I think we're going to hit 12,000 this year, which means we're not hitting our target.
We're not hitting the target.
So this will be a measure of how serious Tina Kotek is about accountability. And I don't think she's very serious.
Well, with that, I just want to thank again Tanner Elliott, chair of the Oregon Young Republicans in Oregon, and of course, a constituent of mine. Well, he grew up in John Day, so,
Yeah.
you know.
Live in Salem right now.
Oh, okay, good enough. But thank you for the work you did, and I know you're looking into more. And great leader Bonham, Senator Starr, thank you. That's it for this podcast on the Oregon D.O.G.E.
Love it.
Thanks.